Hi, and welcome to The Seamless Blend, digital textile dialogues with Gabby and Jorgen. Our primary purpose is to educate and initiate discussions. The opinions expressed are solely our own and do not constitute professional advice or services. We invite contributions from our audience and maintain an open community on Discord.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Final episode of our first season. We started out earlier this year, and we thought this would be a good idea to do some of these episodes. Today is episode 6, and it's also the final episode of this first season. And we made a rough plan to do these first 6 episodes, try to cover some of the main or kind of the key things. I hope we've been able to cover, I think, at least most of the things we kind of set out to try to cover in this this first one.
I've had some good feedback, so we know that people are listening, which is always good.
Yeah. It's been really fun, I think, at least for for the both of us. Today we're thinking we're going to kind of close up this this first season on a bit of an optimistic, kind of positive note. And there is so much potential in and around digital materials, digital product creation, everything we've talked about. And we know also that it's not just positive, and it's not just great. We know that a lot of people in different roles and different companies might find themselves in positions where it's not so easy. There's a lot of situations where, people can be very motivated to change and try to change organizations, but it can still be very, very difficult. And so therefore also can be quite hard to see those opportunities. And we are aware, we wanted to talk about some of these things. For example, there's a bit of a, like we tend to refer to it as the chicken and egg scenario, where the brands and the vendors or the supplier base is kind of almost like waiting for each other to make a decision. It seems sometimes like everyone is waiting for each other and no one really wants to move forward. It's not just big decisions that need to be made around investments. There could be big global geopolitical things that also difficult to know how to handle. But there is this, like, we tend to see that there is a little bit of this chicken and egg scenario. There's a natural power imbalance in the industry as well, at least historically, that we're well aware of. And so we're sometimes wondering almost a little bit, almost like, like what is in the way? Like, why can't we move forward? And just like we have so many good ideas and so much positive change that could be made, but why is it so difficult to change?
Yeah.
And why do you think, Abby?
Yeah. Well, I think so. Obviously, my background's supply base, as in 20 years working on the supply side. So brands and retailers being my customers. So I feel like I have straddled both sides of it, working with brands and then working in the supply base inside of, working with the mills or working at the garment manufacturers. And that's given me quite a lot of insight. And I can see the same challenges being replicated when we're thinking about digital transformation and digital product creation. So there are like 3 scenarios we can see at the moment, or 3 examples I can see at the moment, 3 or 4. And then we're going to go into some scenarios where we have solutions for those kind of like challenges. So right now we know I work with brands who've started working in 3D and they want to sort of activate their supply base. That's sort of like one area that we work in, and we know that is like happening. So it's a brand and they're working directly with their garment manufacturers to make the 3D samples, right? We know we have the garment manufacturers who've got the 3D capabilities, but they're only delivering 3D into 1 or 2 customers. So those garment manufacturers are speaking to us and they're sort of saying, we want to move forward with 3D design and development, but my customers, i.e. the brands and the retailers, are not yet asking for it. So maybe it's 1 or 2 of their customers, the brands, who are asking for it. And you can't build an entire digital strategy based on 1 or 2 of your 20 customers, for example. Then you've got the people in the middle in the supply chain, the suppliers, the agents, the converters, who are sort of straddling the actual manufacturers and the brands. And they are completely stuck in the middle, because until the brands move forward with 3D, they can't embed 3D into their workflows. They can't just do it because the garment manufacturers are doing it. So they are stuck in the middle. And I'm being fed back by suppliers sort of saying, look, until the brands move, we can't move. And this is just good sort of industry feedback we're getting. And then the last point, which I'm hearing quite a lot about, is when working with brands and retailers, so with head offices, in the UK, in Europe, in America, will quite often connect with the sort of like the one or the two 3D evangelists who are really trying to push digital product creation forward. Like they know that that is the way they need to be designing their products, but they're kind of hitting a brick wall. And some of the feedback they're getting inside the companies are their heads saying to them, look, you know, you're working with nascent technologies in a niche market, which is unfortunately my biggest bugbear. I find it quite challenging. And so when I talk to the 3D evangelists, and some of whom I know quite well, I do have some feedback for them, because obviously if you're being told that digital 3D design software is a nascent technology and you're working in a niche market, right? The supply chain is not a niche market. It is a huge global set of companies that are working to develop products across tier 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down to raw materials, right? So the supply chain is a niche market. That's the first thing you can say. Fashion gets pushed to the side sometimes, we know, as you know, being a bit fluffy and non-serious. It doesn't get talked about within legislation, but the supply chain is completely embedded. You know, this is manufacturing through and through, right? So if it's a niche market, you can tell them to jog on. And then if they say nascent technologies, again, we're not talking about nascent technologies here. I've got a figure which always freaks me out slightly, which is around NVIDIA's revenue, right? So NVIDIA making the graphics chips that is kind of pushing all of these workflows forward. Their revenue in 2024 was around $60 billion US dollars. And then Bangladesh as a country in 2023, they exported $42 billion worth of ready-made garments, right? So we've got huge supply chain, we've got massive, you know, graphics chip company, obviously. And these aren't nascent technologies in a niche market. So this is my response. This is how you can reply as well. So this is how I want to kind of like open up the episode today.
Good opening. Yeah, no, that's very interesting too. I don't think we've talked about this before, but it's quite mind-blowing to know that that Nvidia's revenue is, what was it? That'd be something like 18
billion more than Bangladesh's exports.
Yeah. Big companies we're talking about here, and of course also not a small industry like some people can hint towards or kind of very often misunderstand. There's I think some big forces and big business at play here, and I think that's like you mentioned, almost like, you know, let's open up this episode we wanted to open up with I think just almost like a few different examples, and we wanted to talk about some real life cases of what's really like what we're seeing out there, and where material digitization and the things we've talked about so far in the previous episodes are also being used. And we want to focus on, like, we don't want to focus on the negative. We know that it can be quite difficult. We know that's just a kind of reality of working together in companies and across companies and across the supply chain. So we would love to talk about like a lot of the things that we're excited about, where there's a lot of optimism and opportunity, and to kind of try to just approach these, like we've listed out, or we discussed so far, these 4 different scenarios that we talked about, where there's just a lot of room for improvement. And so almost, you know, what would we do if we were in this kind of situations? Maybe, you know, someone in the audience might listen to this and you know, come up with ideas that if you want to share that with us as well, you know, feel free to share that. We're just kind of talking about these 3 scenarios, and then let's kind of almost like see what comes up around these different examples.
Yeah. Okay. So cracking off with the first one. So this is I see this quite a lot in the UK, and it will be working with, you're a brand or a retailer. You've got a really strong product development and sourcing team. So in-house, you have a fabric technologist, you have a garment technologist, you know, in-house based in the UK. I'm using the UK as an example here. You have designers that understand the material selections. And usually what happens with these brands or retailers is they have built up a physical library in head office in the UK. And that's usually, that could be between 246 upwards, nearly like maybe hitting 10,000 materials. That's kind of like the top we've kind of got to. Those material libraries are quite often very well organized, usually controlled by one fantastic person, right? With,
Yes.
some
Yeah.
real like brain who understands all those materials. Or
Yeah.
sometimes you might find that it's a material library that's not quite as well catalogued as that, but it's all in head office and it's held within each department. So each buying unit, like
Mm.
menswear, women's wear, or men's shirts, casual shirts, formal shirts, all have their own mini libraries. And when they come together, they're hitting 5,000 or 6,000 materials, which are their core materials that they want to keep on going back to. And they've got
Yeah.
all the information around them, around the price, the supplier, everything about that. When
Mm.
we have that kind of a scenario, I'm going
Mm.
to ask you, Jorgen, what would you suggest that you do in that
Yeah.
scenario?
No, I think this is a classic scenario. Almost like even I'd like to almost even just try and draw from my own experience with Bandicoot and what we've seen quite a lot of people come to us with here, like with this type of challenges is if you have a material library and you have it kind of physically stored somewhere and you need to digitize all these fabrics, it makes sense to not move the fabrics, but to rather move the
Yeah,
technology to where the fabrics are. And so in
totally.
that case, having on-site digitization or actually bringing the technology to where the fabrics are, I think that's at least what I'm seeing
Yeah,
tend to make sense in most cases. And then you can, of course, there's multiple different technologies that might be needed, but I think also then you don't necessarily have to get to get the technology in-house. Maybe if you can make it a part of a program where
yeah,
as new materials are coming into this library, then you'd like to have them digitized in the same way, then I would probably recommend that either, this one, I really identify with, knowing that there's always one person, or there for some reason seems to be this one person that knows almost like every
the
fabric and
fabric
where they
guru.
are.
That's the person you need, the fabric guru.
Exactly. And if this person is away, then suddenly like no one knows where to find
No,
anything.
you're not getting your
So
98.2 chino no matter what. If they're on holiday, sorry, no chinos.
exactly. And so I think even whether it's that person or whether it's an assistant to this person, it doesn't have to be, someone extremely skilled to be able to do all the digitization. It depends. Again,
Doesn't
like
have to be
in some
technically
cases.
skilled. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. They
Like
don't have to
technological.
be like, a tech person, someone who understands loads of technology. You can do
Mm,
on-site digitization with that person. You could bring in a team to do on-site
yeah.
digitization. I think the main thing is we're saying you've got a large fabric library. It's
Mm,
in one place. Digitize it where it is. Right.
yeah.
You're not going to be sending it to places,
Yeah.
even if it was local or nearshore stuff. I think we say you do it where it is, you have control of it. And then you've got this very, very, very high quality searchable database for one,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
before you get into digital product creation.
Yeah.
So if you're looking
And
for
I say,
speed, that's
yeah,
it.
exactly. Like that's I think some of the things that are quite important if you're doing this is that, and this is something we've talked a lot about in the previous episodes, is also, don't just go for the first and best alternative that you can find in terms of
Mm,
technology and even, someone to just provide a service. It's really important to think about also, if you've got this physical material library, think about where that like once you then digitize it, where are all the digital files going to go into and
yeah.
how are they going to be used, and have a little bit of a think about these things before you go into it. And then there are either, there's technologies that we have talked about previously that are readily available to be purchased or rented or used in across multiple different models, or you can even get someone, to come in, fly in from, a different country if that's what you need. But people can come to you, bring the technology to you, and then do the whole thing as a big project. Or we've
Yeah.
done that even from Bandicoot's with some of Bandicoot's customers in Australia, where the team has actually gone on site and then digitized a whole bunch of fabrics and then left after a few days. So this
Yeah.
is something that I think is very possible to do.
And just you mentioned about just quickly about where you're going to put those digital materials. You need a digital
Yeah.
asset management system. I do not suggest you use SharePoint or Google Drive, right? No
No.
shade on
No.
both of those, but just don't. So have a realistic asset management system, whatever that may be. We have those in
Hmm.
previous episodes. Feel free to shout us. Yeah, we don't need to go
Exactly.
over that again, but
No, there is something there though that I feel like it was almost important to highlight that, and it's something that I just almost like wanted to bring up the example because it has come up several times for me recently on how we're used to, for example, having, let's just take a normal, like a JPEG or a PNG or like a normal image
mhm.
file, with an operating system, like, like with the standard Windows or Mac computer, you can put one of those files on your desktop and then you can just double click on it and then said you can see the image, like
Yeah,
you have this file, it's on your computer and you can double click on it and then suddenly you kind of, bring out the value of what that file holds, which is the image,
yeah,
which can then be some fond memories or something, or and that's relatively easy. Technology is built files like that. But for example, like with digital materials, it's a little bit different in the way
Yeah.
that you can just put that file, whether it's like a U3M file or if it's even all the different texture maps individually, you know, in PNG format, or, you know, however you have your digital fabric files, you can't just put them on the desktop and then double click them and have them opened up in a way that makes sense. So that's just really important as a bit of an example, to add
it's a
to,
good
as you
distinction to
said.
make. If people are new to
Yeah.
this, that's a really good distinction to make. That there's not you can't just view them straight away. You need to view them in a
Yes.
system that can visualize the 3D attributes 100%.
Exactly. So I think
So
we cover the most important. Like, as an example, if you have materials on site, no need to move them. Move the technology to you know where the materials are. On-site digitization seems to make sense. And
yeah,
the second one, do you want
second one.
to
Yeah.
explain a little bit about
So
that?
strong links to manufacturers that source the fabrics for you. So another scenario I often find myself in, as obviously having been a product developer for 15 years, you might work with your garment manufacturers really closely. However, that you're not really in control of where the materials are coming from. They might be sourcing those materials for you. They source the materials, they source the trims. It could be because they're a vertical manufacturer and they provide that service entirely, or it could just be that they are a manufacturer that provides that service that pulls everything in. Even if they don't make the materials, they might just pull in the materials and the trims. They take care of all of that for you, like full service, as it were, full service vendor.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense at that point for you to go through all the channels of all your different garment manufacturers and bring all of those fabrics into your head office. That is what I would see that as inefficient. It's a waste of energy, a waste of time, and it's quite a laborious process to do that. So at that point, the suggestion that we would have is that you work with your vendors, your garment manufacturers, to be digitizing for you. So that is working with your garment manufacturers if they've got 3D capabilities. And if they don't have 3D capabilities, then working with a service supplier that can give you those 3D capabilities. But the main thing is to say is, if you have 50 materials that are split between 10 different garment manufacturers, it's going to be a long job to pull all of those in and then you digitize them and then feed it back out again. Actually, at this point, you want to be working with your vendors, with your garment manufacturers, explain to them that you want to be working in 3D. They can tell you their capabilities. If not, then it's another sort of like push for the garment manufacturers to hear, okay, this is another brand that now wants to start working in 3D. So
that's a very good point. I thought about that as you said it as well, just around how, like, if you are a brand or if you are a designer and you're looking to produce something, with a supplier or a vendor or someone that is able to pull together fabrics and trims and everything for you, it's very important to even just voice that all the way from the beginning that you're planning to use 3D, or to at least inquire a little bit on what kind of 3D technologies does this vendor have readily available. Do they, for example, have the possibility to support or even collaborate on certain 3D design files from Clo or Browseware or Optitex or Style3D, or just trying to kind of start there and look into, as a brand and as a designer, could you be working in a specific software that would make it easy, and or like does the software that you and your vendor base are using, do they kind of line up? Maybe does your vendor have fabric digitization in-house? Then you can do a lot there. I think that almost like this trust with a vendor is very important also, that you work on establishing a strong partnership or a strong kind of mutual trust, where that you can rely on your vendor to then bring in the right fabrics, digitize them and share them with you, and maybe they can even do some of that kind of vetting
and I think
at the vendor side.
Another area of this, which is quite important, is thinking about, if you want to work with your vendor on digitization, I think a good practice would be to also almost book capacity in the same way that you book capacity for your materials or your garments. So, for example, I think of it like when organic cotton first came into the market. It was small percentages of organic cotton. So you might have gone to your garment manufacturer, say, like, I need you to source me this material and I want you to flip it from standard cotton to organic cotton. The garment manufacturer might have said, yes, I can do that, but I can only do that if you commit 9 months in advance, because I actually have to purchase the cotton on the market and I have to put a commitment in. It's the same kind of idea if you're working on 3D. Not saying that you need to commit 9 months in advance at all, but it is by saying we have a range. We make, for example, 30 pieces with you each season. We want to commit to 50% of those becoming 3D. Then it can be put in place. Then the garment manufacturer can put people in place, can put the technology in place, can make sure they've got the capacity to deliver that to you as well. It's understanding that it's all pipeline based and it's all capacity based, what can be done. And we work in peaks and troughs, we work in seasons, and we know that things crush. But that's, what that is, the supply chain. We can manage that. What we can't manage is if it goes from nothing to everything overnight. Because you can't actually get the people in, or you can't train everyone who needs to be trained within that time period. So I think it's really important to consider that it's a process with your garment manufacturer, and you guys are investing in it together, I would say.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think well, it's just almost to talk about, or like to mention how a lot of vendors already have a lot of 3D capabilities, and so it's just really important to almost like go out there, and even when you're choosing your vendors, know that there's a lot of vendors that are also, even just to refer a little bit back to the chicken and egg scenario here, is that there's this scenario almost like even where a brand might adopt a specific 3D technology or like a 3D design tool. Let's say, for example, Clo 3D, and then they're designing everything Clo 3D, and then the vendor may not, because they don't really know that the brand is heading in that direction. Or oppositely, the vendor, the garment maker might adopt 3D technology, and the brands are not really moving in that direction. And therefore, if no one's really talking to each other, no one really knows. But this is something that's happening a lot, is that the vendors are already on the market for this technology. They're just waiting for small hints that makes them feel a little bit more confident that they can move forward with this. Kind of, as you say, also let them know a little bit beforehand, give vendors time to actually get the technologies in and acquire the kind of skills and the people that need. A lot of vendors are very eager to do so, but they just need to know that there's a certain demand for it in the market.
Yeah, I completely agree. Then the third scenario we were thinking about is, and the scenario that I've seen as well and worked in, is when you completely rely on your supply base for your fabric needs. So you have no close relationship with your mills, and maybe you actually it's a bit more than not even having no close relationship with your mills. What you might be is, if you're small, for example, you just might not have, it's small, it's minimum order quantities that you're just hitting. So it's you can't sort of like strike up those relationships where you're like, yes, we're going to do 3D in the future with you, because it's just, you don't have that sort of size of a relationship to work with. So it's a case of, maybe you might work with different mills each season. You might pull in your materials, maybe 20 to 30 materials each season, but you're not maybe buying from every single different mill. You're doing a lot of sampling in that case. And I'm thinking particularly of someone I've worked with, which is a tailoring company in America, for example. So they pull in lots of different, high-end Italian materials, but they can't always say, well, we're always going to buy from this people, we're all going to buy on that, because it depends on what their customer is ordering for the tailoring pieces. That scenario is perfect for a serviced digitisation and a service scanning business. So obviously Bureau offers that here in Bangladesh and in the UK, but you can find that globally. There are service scanning suppliers, but that's when because you might dip in and dip out. You only need it twice a year, maybe, for example, because you're only doing 2 collections a year, and that's absolutely fine. But you can still utilize 3D, but you don't have to have this in big upfront investment or even building the relationship with the mills and talking with the garment manufacturers about 3D, when you're already just trying to build a fiscal relationship with them, right? Honestly, because at the end of the day, it's all about capacity and how much they can work with you going forward. So yeah.
And maybe even just to mention from a practical point of view, very often how that looks like is that you can reach out to, like, the way that you do this is that it's just slightly more independent when you work with service digitization, like, for example, like with Bureau, in that you then have your, for example, garment manufacturer or vendor that you're working with, and you can then ask the vendor to just even send the fabrics directly to this location where fabrics can become digitized, and then you just make an arrangement, with this service digitization center or company that you're then working with. So it's a very easy thing to manage, even though if you're a small company, as long as you just almost like take on the task of organizing, it's not even that much logistics, but almost even just asking your vendor to get some fabric sent over to this digitization hub, and then having the digitization hub actually digitize them, then suddenly you could be getting your digital files, and it's completely independent of the vendor, and it's just a service that's being delivered.
Yeah, and we have sort of like those, we have little orders like that coming through relatively
Mm,
regularly, and it might just be for like one garment, like 5 different
yeah,
materials in one garment. And you can
yeah.
tell, it's someone we work with locally, and they're like, right, okay, we just need these 5 materials done. And we're actually not party to what the garment's going to look like. It's just 5 different
Mm,
materials to make up that piece of outerwear, whatever it might be. But you can
yeah,
see it's the small orders, right? It's not like the big kind of like core pieces that are running through. So
yeah,
it's very much being used in the industry right now, and a good way to kind of start for sure.
yeah, yeah.
And then,
And then,
yeah,
yeah, the
finally,
final
we've
one. Do you want to
so not well,
cover
yeah,
along with
I keep on, I'll go again, but
it?
only because with my product development background, I love all
Yes,
of
no, but
these
this is also why it's so
scenarios.
good that you can cover over some of these examples,
Yeah.
or kick them off.
So the last one is when you nominate fabrics directly with the mill. So this is different from having a large fabric library in head office, maybe. This is more when
Mm,
it's a case of you're a bit of a leaner operation, but you're going directly to the mill, and you know exactly what materials you're going to buy. And then those materials get sent to your garment manufacturers around the globe,
mm,
wherever they might be, or close to your mill. Right.
yeah,
And we
yeah.
see this, we see this with brands and retailers that have really strong relationship with tier 2 mills. So it's really all about
Mm,
like provenance of the mill and the materials they're using. It's quite often heritage wool,
yeah,
cashmere,
yeah,
Italian shirtings, right? So it's really because they're putting the mill's name on the garment as well, right? Because it's a
yeah.
high quality, high value mill that they're
Mm,
working
mm,
with.
mm,
And at this point, we recognize that the brand or the retailer has quite a lot of trust with that mill, but that
yeah.
mill might not, is unlikely to at the moment have a digitization arm or a digitization service. So at that
Mm,
point, you can digitize at source. You can see if the mill does have any digitization or 3D
mm,
capabilities. Some of the high end mills are getting there, right? That is,
mm,
a beginning point. But if they don't, then you can digitize at source in country as well, which can be quite good. Or you can use service scanning, but like digitizing at source, close to mill, mutual
yeah.
trust, everyone's working together, building relationships with um, similar companies, that works quite well.
Yeah.
We found, so for example, if we're working with a UK mill, we will scan and we will do everything here in the UK. It builds that
Mm,
trust. It's
yeah.
relevant for the IP of the mill as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
things aren't being sent to different countries, or they may be worried they're being sent to different mills, for example, which could then possibly be copied in the future. So it's sort of
Mm,
saying, we understand that you've got high value product, and we'll look after it just as well in the digital environment and make it as high quality as possible as you look after it in the physical environment.
yeah, and even just since we're talking about like optimism and opportunity and the
Mm,
joy and all these things, and in particular for me and I think for both of us, because we talked a lot about this idea of digitization at source, and how like it's almost like it's easy to think that the future is going to be digitization at source, at least within the mill. It's like it's an easy vision to, at least I feel, for me to wrap my head around, on how,
mhm,
if a fabric mill produces a fabric, then the fabric mill almost like might as well already just produce a digital, or create a digital twin of that fabric. And then you have this, and I feel like in particular now I've thought a bit more about recently around how a physical fabric has had there's thousands of years of history around. Like we've had maybe better than me how long back the textiles history is dating. um Thousand, yeah, a few
about 20,
thousand.
about well 20,000. I mean, like from string, when we started like putting string on our
Yeah.
bodies, yeah, about
And
20,000.
the point was basically even just that it's been a long time. Like we've had physical fabrics for a long time, and by having physical fabrics, I also mean that we can then be like, we have this intermediary kind of semi-finished product, that we have the fabric itself. Most people don't use almost like that, the fabric straight. They would like to either cut and sew it into a garment, or
Mhm.
make it into a sofa, or a piece of furniture, and these things. And I think that what's really interesting with the time that we've come to right now is this. There's this added value that you can add to the physical fabric or textile if you now digitize it. And I think we're coming
Mm,
closer and closer to the point of having that value that you can now add to it. Like we talked about DPC, and we talked about almost like visualization and all these different things that you can, if you have a digital fabric, you can bring it straight into Clo. You can design, you can do all sorts of things with it without wasting any materials. You can now create nice visualization and 3D renders. You have all these opportunities, and all that from just digitizing that one fabric, which means that almost like that the combination of a physical fabric and a digital fabric has greater value. Well, it really adds value to the physical fabric so that you can do so much more with it. And I think this is where I just wanted to almost like, promote this for fabric mills. I know that it's chicken and egg scenario where, fabric mills are waiting for the brands to make a decision, and then the mills, just almost like don't want to make a decision until the brands tell them to make a decision, or it goes a bit back and forth like that. But there's an incredible opportunity, I think, right now also for if a fabric mill starts to digitize fabric in-house and then starts to actually tap into the value of those digital fabrics, or what you can now do with those digital fabrics, your own DPC, your own, almost like, imagine a fabric mill can start to make, renders of garments or different products just to showcase their fabrics in use. And there's just so much potential.
I completely agree.
I think to be unlocked. That's, I think, an important point of,
just to follow on for that, if we look at the fact that, YKK, obviously with their trims, have developed a digital library of trims. Chargeur, which is an interlining supplier for many products, but also for tailoring and shirts, have developed a digital library of their materials, right? It's a case of, if you're seen in this space, it's only going to add value, right? So if you can add a digital, even if it's a small digital collection of your materials, which can be fed into the top 3D software companies, that's going to be a really, really positive added value for your customers going forward. Not saying that it has to be your entire stock book or your entire spring summer 25 collection, but this is what we want to see, is that as those materials are coming out, you've got a digital version, so designers can be designing and iterating with them from the get-go, as opposed to obviously having to then request 30 meters of sampling to weave it up just to see if it looks all right in a shirt.
Exactly. And that's just like such a simple example of where you can see, the real value of just having a digital version of your fabric, is that you can, like you have this infinite yardages, and you have like, you create a digital twin of it, and it kind of looks and behaves. And we know it's not the same, like you can't touch and feel it, and still, certain elements of it, but you can get so far into the simulation or kind of ideation and creative process with a digital fabric. And one of the great benefits is you're not wasting physical materials or resources or even time, waiting for shipping and all these things. So lots of opportunity in that particular space.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. We have, or we thought a little bit about also almost like, how is it like to be out there and someone who's working in this field, like you mentioned, Gabby, earlier about, how is it like almost like to be a 3D evangelist, and sometimes feeling a bit like stepped on, or people that don't really understand the significance of the industry and the companies and just the size of like what's happening right now. And so if you are a prospective employee, or someone that has a bit of, let's say, for example, a fashion background but doesn't necessarily have a digital skills and all these things, what you would like to learn, we also wanted to highlight there how there's so much to be optimistic about. There's so much opportunity out there, but again, we of course wanted to address the fact that it's not always just easy. Like you can't just go out there and say that I'm a 3D designer and that's making everything easy. Like, what do you think, Gabby, from your experience? I'm almost like, how should people position themselves out there in the market?
First of all, I would say, if you're a designer that wants to move into 3D, or a 3D designer, is choose your product area as a starting point. In the same way that you would have done with your design skills, you choose your product area, whether it's menswear, it could be tops and bottoms, it could be boys wear, it could be women's wear, it could be lingerie, outerwear, but really do choose your area, because again, you'll be able to hone your skills as a 3D lingerie designer, because if you are a 3D lingerie designer, for example, you have to consider the avatar a lot more than you do if you're doing outerwear, for example. So you might start moving into kind of avatar creation, skins, all of those kind of things that you'll be looking at. So your skill levels and your research is going to go wider than just the software that you're using, right? I think that's something to think about. Another thing to consider is that quite often we find large companies will say, yes, we've got 3D capabilities. We've got X person over there using X software, for example.
Yes.
Yes, we've got one person using Clo or Browseware in the corner, and you wave at them and they can't look up because they're so busy. That
Yeah.
it's not realistic to have a 3D strategy that has just one person designing all of your 3D, because you've got all these different product areas and all this different handwriting. It's the same idea for design. You need to build up your libraries, you build up all of your trims. Your trims for outerwear are very different from your trims for lingerie, for example. Your washes for denim will be different from anything else you're putting on your other garments digitally. So it's give yourself a fighting chance, is what I would say, by honing in on a product area. And then if you are working in that product area, and then it's like, well, actually, you've been doing some great lingerie. Could you do this denim? Be like, okay, well, let's consider what it's going to take for you as a designer to do that. Or maybe, what skills you might need, or how you need to share that job with someone. Okay. It just maybe isn't realistic for that one person to be doing everything. I mean, there are some really, really talented 3D designers out there. I'm not suggesting that, but the reality of having just one 3D designer compared to 10 physical designers is very unbalanced. It's not really realistic.
And maybe even, since we're talking about this, like it's kind of a mutual this whole employee employer. You as an employee, you can't just think that it's all your responsibility to hone in skills and become really proficient at certain things, so that you are positioning yourself really well for a position with this certain employer. You have to be quite critical, I think, also as a prospective employee, looking at the company and as with anything, is almost even just coming up with a few examples here, particularly for this type of work. As with anything, if you're looking for a job or speaking to someone, and if this massive multinational company is suddenly hiring to create a 3D department with only one person, then you should also maybe see that as a bit of a red flag and start to ask some questions. So just remember that it's mutual. It's not just that someone that knows how to use Clo 3D is supposed to take care of everything within the entire company. It's
what's the build out? What's the strategy? What's the vision of the company? Where are they taking it? What's their long-term vision? Are IT involved? Are finance involved? I mean, I know you can't ask that as an individual employee going in, but when we go in to do digitisation work and digital transformation, we're not just chatting to one person, right? It is talking to everyone in the company. Is everyone on board? Because it's a strategy, not just a flick of a switch kind of thing. And then I also wanted to mention the 3D Retail Coalition, which I've been sort of like following along from the sides, and I am aware that they do a huge amount of work in academia in America at the moment. Currently, I think they have some global projects as well, but I know they're doing a lot of work in America with American universities, and they are building, as I understand it, a matrix, so a learning matrix for fashion design, 3D fashion design and production, which means it's a matrix of skills which will be taught across universities. So it's looking for standardization of skills being learned across universities for 3D production and 3D design, because they are two different things. Designing is different from production. So that's, I don't know when it's coming out, but I'm keeping an eye on the team there. And I'll be very interested to see that matrix, and hopefully that can then be rolled out across into different countries as well. The UK has a lot of the universities in the UK have adopted 3D design programs, a little bit less on the 3D production, but it's still, you can get really good skills still at the UK universities. But it'd be great to see like an underlying matrix that's kind of saying these are the key skills that you need, building out those design pipelines as well, whether it's going into customer facing or is it going into production, and how do they kind of fit together and slot together.
Yeah, because now it seems a little bit like it's up to each university to almost figure out exactly how they're going to approach it
Oh, it
on their
is.
own.
Yeah, I know. And I really feel for them actually, because again, I was chatting to a fashion design course leader the other day who has so much joy about 3D design softwares, but she is having to learn it herself, which is, she said, is fine. She's happy to do. She's got pattern cutting background. So she's learning it first, then she's going to be teaching it. But also it's a case of, wouldn't it be great if actually they were learning from what the industry needs and how the industry is using it, and then it's being brought in. It's all this industry and academia collaboration. But that's what I think is really important when it comes to training the students now in 3D design skills. So,
and that's, I guess, in combination with some of the other things we talked about, can sometimes be a bit frustrating in the industry in general, with just the lack of almost like standards and matrices and common approaches and shared knowledge and all these things. We're not exactly almost like, known historically as an industry in particular, I guess, with fashion and
Don't like
something you hear a lot of people
sharing.
talk about. Not so much sharing, no, and especially maybe even like this development of these underlying matrices or principles that can be almost like brought up bottom up
Yeah.
in a little bit of a different way. Yeah.
I think I would respond to that with, we don't like sharing, but we do like standards. So
Yes.
standards are
Yeah.
by an individual body, an industry body that we can go to and be like, this is the standard we should be following. But we don't want to have to go and ask our competitor what that standard is, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But it's I think a lot of exciting things, just I think across the industry in general, that's just happening. I think whether it's digital or physical, we're trying to focus each of these episodes on everything that's happening in a digital space, starting from materials and onwards into product and I think kind of everything from there. There's a lot already happening, and I think we're just in the beginning of all of this. So there's a lot more that's going to happen, and so it's going to be challenging. We mentioned this before, and we're going to mention it again. Is that it's just by nature, when you're coming into a field that there's so much change around all this, you have to be prepared for that. There will be changes. So, almost like the key message here is that focus on that joy, find that joy, and find that motivation that can kind of keep you going and keep you learning new things. It's going to be very, very important, because there will still be a lot of things that's going to change.
Yeah,
Is
for
there
sure.
anything you wanted to add at the end of the last episode of the season, Gabby?
I mean, I just think that I've been in this space for three years now, and
Mm,
I find it completely exhilarating, and I enjoy learning about new softwares and how we can develop better every single day. I find it very invigorating, I must say, and especially if you've worked in the industry for a good while, as I have, where
yeah.
elements of the industry can feel actually quite difficult and challenging. This space, I find, it gives me a renewed sense of purpose within the fashion and
Mm,
the supply chain. So I find it
yeah.
very positive. So that's my joy from
Mm.
from where we're working in.
And maybe even the two of it. I know it's a good, like, even for me, I think a lot of the joy it lies within this element of being able to even influence or kind of see. Because for me, I think also personally, I like to see a lot of I think at least the way I've gotten to where I am today, or I guess my path has been very much just finding challenges or finding things that aren't necessarily working the way that I've seen it, either working in other industries or the way that kind of maybe I thought it could work maybe better in my head, and then pursuing all of these things one by one. And I feel like it's a really great space to be in, where if you would like to be a bit involved in how you can influence or kind of come up with new ideas, because it's still very early on in terms of how
Yeah.
things are put together. And sometimes, even because I didn't come from a fashion education background, I have sometimes it's a blessing and sometimes it's a curse, but I've found it sometimes quite nice to not have had like the traditional training and have come in with a
I
bit
think
of
it's
just
good. Yeah, I agree.
like I feel like I can ask all the questions that are maybe things other people would say that like you should have learned that in school, but I never actually went to that school. So I think this can also be a good thing. Like, you don't have to come from a fashion background to get into this. I guess me and you are also just two different examples of exactly, like, you can come from a textiles and fashion
Yeah,
background, or you can come completely from something else.
totally.
So yeah, we have a Notion board that we've mentioned before, and then we're going to share. We've mentioned this in the last few episodes. Just that there's so much software. There are so many different things that you can look into. So we're going to leave you with something at the end of this season that you can spend some time digging into. And maybe until we come back online. There's going to be a long list of companies across all sorts of different digitization or 3D CAD or digital fabric, procedural fabric creation, or all sorts of digital asset management. And just we're trying to gather as much as possible. So if you find something that's missing on that list, then please feel free to let us know. We're going to try to get that list out next week, so that
Hmm.
we kind of wrap up this season this week, and then we're going to share our Notion board. And I think generally we're just very happy to have had someone listen. If you listen to this, then we're very happy that you have listened to and chosen to spend your time together with us. And we're very excited, or we hope to also get some ideas, inspiration, maybe even from everyone out there for what we could be doing better and more of for the next season.
Exactly. Anything you want us to expand on, or any points that you're thinking I'd love to hear an episode on something in particular would be really good. Then I guess the last thing on my side, thank you. Yes, thank you for listening. And also thank you to friends and family that have helped with this, whether it's either lending microphones or doing sound checks or whatever they may have been doing, vacating rooms, many different things.
Couldn't have done it without you. So
couldn't have
thanks to everyone that I've been able to, been here to kind of support. So we'll be back. Feel free to reach out to us in the meantime, and enjoy the early summer for those of you who are then, I guess, in around the same locations as we are.
The Northern Hemisphere.
Yes. Okay.
All
See
right,
you
brilliant.
online. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Seamless Blend. If you enjoyed today's discussion, feel free to subscribe. We also invite you to connect with us and participate in our discussions on Discord. Let us know if you agree, disagree, or have any questions. Until next time, take care.